Hello, class, and welcome to lecture number 4, Addressing Your Audience. I know this is quick on the heels of the other lecture about framing your argument, but I wanted to give you a couple of lectures or presentations that have to do with, that'll really help you put together your pitch presentation. The last time we talked about what kind of argument you're making. It's an evaluative argument. You're going to be arguing about why your debate or controversy is important. Okay, that is an evaluation. You're determining that it is important based upon certain criteria that you will include in your pitch. For the project pitch outline, you might want to include that criteria and how you will determine that something is important. Okay, you don't have to specifically list criteria, but how will you prove that this debate is an important one that people should pay attention to or get involved in? Today, though, we're going to talk about how to put the polish on your argument. So you're trying to prove that an evaluation is the right one, that your debate is an important topic. Excuse me. But in order to do that, you need to address your audience. You need to know who you're talking to. So today we're going to talk about how to address that audience and how to bring them in and make them see what your point of view is. All right. That makes it sound manipulative. This isn't manipulative. This is just what people do, what writers do, what directors do when they're putting together a text. They think about who their audience is and how to appeal to them. So just real quick, we're not going to go too much into this, but the rhetorical situation you guys are well familiar with. The audience in rhetor, that's what we're talking about today. How does this connection matter? Or another way to look at it is how do you show the audience why the topic is important. So all of these things are important. We're talking about the top of the triangle, not necessarily this. This is where we talked about last lecture, your understanding of the topic. All right, so in other words, what your evaluation is of the debate or the controversy. All right, we will talk a little bit more about constraints. If you still want to learn more about that, please let me know. I know that this was something that I struggled to really get my head around, what exactly a constraint was and why it mattered. We're going to talk a little bit about that today, but and a lot about context. But basically, we're looking at today how the audience fits into this situation. All right. So just real quick reminder from our second lecture. You have basically 4 types of audience. You have your general public, okay, which is that really broad audience that a lot of people think of when they think of who was this written for. And it's a very broad thing, but usually most writers or most producers, or rhetors rather, what they do is they put together a general public that they have a very specific sense of. It's not just all Americans, it's a very specific part of Americans that they think about, or that they think all Americans are, if you want to think that broadly. So they're talking to a general public, but they're also talking to an implied audience. All right. So even the president, when he talks to America from behind the desk in the White House or whatever, he is usually talking to a very specific idea of what he thinks of when he thinks of Americans. He's not talking to everybody. He's talking to what he thinks of when he thinks of an American. That's the implied audience. All right, it doesn't have to be a specific person, but like that idea of what kind of people are paying attention to his speech and that sort of stuff. Right. Then you also have your target audience, okay, which is what you guys should honestly be thinking about when you're putting together your pitch presentation. Your target audience is your classmates. You're trying to convince them. Right? It's very targeted. It's still general, but the people in this class are not everybody in the world. You can still think about them and think about them in very specific ways. For one thing, they're all trying to get a degree at UK, whether that's a degree in the humanities, social sciences, or a pre-professional program, or the hard sciences. They're still here to get a degree. So think about it in that way, if nothing else. All right. And then we're not going to be worried about this, but the tailor audience are those people that you kind of create the audience and then write to it. All right. You handpick the audience. This happens a lot in political conventions. And sometimes you can see this with Oscar bait, as they call some movies. that they are written for the Academy. They are made for the Academy of Movies or whatever it's called, because they are thinking tailored. This is tailored specifically for this audience. It's not just targeting this audience, but it's made specifically for them to make them feel good. So it's all about the audience in this. So anyways, just to refer back to the last lecture, I talked about Ghostbusters and how a lot of evaluations of Ghostbusters originally were very negative because you had people that were very much they were very much in the camp that the original Ghostbusters was a great movie that shouldn't have been messed with. And then there were also people that had a problem with the all-female cast, even though the original Ghostbusters in the 80s was an all-male cast. So you had all these different things going on. Well, one of the things that the Ghostbusters struggled with is that when it was first announced that the movie was being made, everybody assumed it was going to be the same as the original. And so when the announcement that it was an all-female cast, then it started becoming clear who the audience was for Paul Feig and the production company that put together Ghostbusters. They were not aiming at the people that grew up in the 80s watching the original Ghostbusters. They were aiming at a new group, and they were also aiming their film at more of a diverse crowd, but also a more women, trying to get women to go see this movie as much as the men who would go because they liked Ghostbusters, the original. So they tailored this audience based off the casting, based off of some of the choices as far as the casting. So you have SNL alumni, okay, including Leslie Jones, who, if you don't know, she's gotten a lot of press because of the way that people have been responding to her on Twitter. She was a huge supporter of Team USA in the Olympics, and as a result got flown down to Rio halfway through the Olympics just to report through Twitter on what's going on in Rio. And so, you know, she's got this big following. So they're bringing in that group as well. They're bringing in all these different things through the way they've written Ghostbusters, but also through the casting, those sort of choices. It's all a way to get to a targeted audience, to make the case that they want to make in the movie, but they're trying to reach this audience. Same can be said for the letter that I talked to you about last lecture from the president of the University of Chicago. This was meant for, it's targeted at the students, the incoming class from the University of Chicago, okay? But it's reached a larger audience and everybody's talking about it because this targeted audience got shifted. And so one of the problems that the University of Chicago is having right now is that this message was changed when it started being talked about in the news media, because the way they wrote it was way too specific for that audience, and they had to have considered that it might go broader than that. So these are just things that Redors have to think about, film directors or authors or whatever. Okay, so just to go back, also, when you're thinking about your audience, these are some good questions to start with. What level of familiarity does my target audience have with this subject, with your public controversy? Okay, is it a well-known debate? Is it something that everybody is kind of weighing in on, or is it something smaller, like the idea of trigger warnings? That's a smaller debate. Not everybody thinks about what that means. Okay, what age is my target audience? Okay, you can think about this in terms of your classmates. What age are they? They could be, 40, or they could be 18, but on average, who takes Word 111? It's people 18 to 24, okay? Usually on the lower end because it's a gen ed, so that's something to think about. What types of vocabulary would my target audience expect? Okay, so you don't want to use a lot of jargon, at least not yet. A lot of very specific, field-specific terms. Okay, is there any cultural preconceptions my target might have that I need to be aware of? All of this is going to talk to the appeals that we're going to look at, right, today, and you should have read about in your textbook, right? So there are two different ways to talk about appeals. We can talk about these as the rhetorical appeals, or the way that we frame an argument or frame a rhetorical situation to understand it. So you have the logos, which is the organization or how you put together the argument, and the subject and how you talk about the subject. You have ethos, which was the credibility of the speaker. Okay, so what credibility do I have to speak on the subject? Okay, and pathos, or the emotion, the feeling that goes along with this presentation or this rhetorical argument. These are very broad ways of looking at an appeal, and these have to do with the text or with the whole situation. These are not specific ways that a rhetor can deal with or talk to or appeal to the audience. And so that's what we're going to talk about more today. So first things first, and I'm going through this like very similar to the way your book goes through it. So if you want to follow along in your book, you're welcome to. The first thing I want to talk about is the audience's approach, okay? Or thinking about it this way, how does the audience come to the subject? Let me go. Yeah. How does the audience go to the subject? How do they deal with this topic? So we're going to start by talking about this and how to appeal to this and how to acknowledge this when you are putting together your speeches, okay? We will then talk about kind of the context more than anything, and at the end we'll talk about the relationship with the audience and the rhetor. Okay. So the first way to think about this is to appeal to expectations, okay? And this is where you're talking about genre expectations. So if I am listening to a joke, then I'm going to expect certain things to happen. There's going to be a twist and all sorts of stuff like that. If I'm listening to a comedian, that's what I'm expecting. If a politician gives a stand-up routine, that's going to be very strange. Okay, that's going to be something that I am not going to be prepared for, because if Hillary Clinton got up there and started spitting jokes left and right, then I would be thrown for a loop. And most people would, because our expectations are that she's a politician, she's going to give a political speech, not make jokes. All right? And you can see this in reverse a lot of times right now on Twitter, where a lot of comedians recently, Jen Kirkman for one, I mean, there have been a couple others, have come under fire for making jokes on Twitter. But it's separated from the context, so a lot of people don't have that expectation that this is a joke. They don't know who Jen Kirkman is. They just see her tweet. And they think, oh, this woman, and the example I'm thinking of is Jen Kirkman made a joke about, oh, I'm glad Hillary's a murderer, making a joke playing off of a couple of different things that are conspiracy theories about Hillary Clinton. But this expectation was gone. They expected it to be truthful because it's talking about politics, or at least opinionated because it's talking about politics, instead of that opinionated that comes along with the touch of sarcasm or satire that comes along with a joke. So when you are putting together an appeal to expectations, you want to fit your text to what your audience anticipates. Right? So you're making a persuasive speech, or you're making a academic presentation. Your audience is going to expect you to clearly lay out your thesis statement, to clearly delineate each point from the next, and to use PowerPoint slides to help aid their comprehension. That's what's expected. That's the genre of an academic presentation. Okay? You want to do this because it allows you to focus the audience's attention on the themes, theses, or ideas at the center of your document. If I'm messing with the expectations of my audience too much, then they aren't going to be able to focus on what I want them to pay attention to. And it's just going to be them trying to figure out how I'm talking about the topic instead of what I'm saying about the topic. Right? It also allows your audience to comfortably follow the document and what you're saying. Now, excuse me. Now, what you want to think about with this is why. Why do we go with why do we play along with these genres at all times? because this idea of switching and focusing on a specific theme or idea allows us to do a lot within the genres. Okay. Now I've got here 3 different things that all play off of the reality dating show. In fact, they all play off of The Bachelor. Okay. Now, if you're not familiar with these TV shows, then that's fine. You don't have to be. But The Bachelor is a reality dating show where one man goes on several dates with, I think it's 20 women, narrowing down to the one that he inevitably proposes to at the end of the show, so that he's no longer a bachelor. So you have The Bachelor. It's been around for a while. A lot of people watch it obsessively, but it has a very routine structure about the way each episode goes along and the way each season goes along. You know, certain things happen in a certain way, and it's very comforting to watch, because when we're paying attention to each season of The Bachelor, we want to know about that character and the women that are interested in him, not trying to figure out what's going on with the dates and with everything else as each season starts. We know that. We just need to find out about the people. All right. Then you have Burning Love, which is a comedic spoof on The Bachelor. All right. It's a whole bunch of comedians playing roles on an internet, on a webcast thing on Yahoo, I think it was, where the Bachelor was an idiot and the women are all playing roles. Now, these roles are very specific to what you expect of the different types of women that are going to be on The Bachelor, so they're playing off of that. And here, we're trying to find out, ideally what they want you to do is to try to become invested in The Bachelor and hope that he finds the love of his life. Here, they want you to notice the ridiculous types of people that get involved. Okay, so for instance, this is a psychotic woman that is stalking the Bachelor. Now, you don't get a stalker on the original Bachelor, but on Burning Love, you get that. Why? Because they are trying to point out that some of these women are a little bit too invested in this character. Okay, so they're pointing to themes by using that genre. And then this, Unreal, is another play off of The Bachelor, except this is a serious drama instead of just a all-around comedic piece. And Unreal tracks the behind the scenes. So they're playing off of this genre and the genre of a nighttime soap opera or nighttime serial, and using that to investigate the people that would put this show together. Okay, so that's kind of what they're playing with, and that's why you would do this, so that your audience can follow along to a certain point and only pay attention to what's deviating, what's breaking these conventions, as we talked about in chapter 1 of your book. Okay, you can also have an appeal to interest, and this is pretty straightforward. You want to make an informed assumption as to what will generate interest in the audience, because you want them to be interested in the topic so that they pay attention to what you have to say about it. All right? You don't want an audience to not care at all. Think about classes that you've had, and one of them might be this one, that you just didn't care what the teacher said. Did you enjoy going to class? Did you enjoy paying attention to the lectures? No. But if you became interested because you saw why it was important, then that made it more useful. And that's where an appeal to interest comes in handy. All right, you'll notice I talk a lot about pop culture when I'm talking about rhetoric. It might be dated because I'm older, but I bring that sort of stuff up because it's more interesting to talk about pop culture when we're talking about rhetoric than to talk about, ancient Greek theorists, right? So one thing to do when you're making an informed assumption is you're moving beyond the stereotypes. Okay, so not just a stereotype of a college kid, but looking at who your classmates might be and trying to actually build towards that, assuming based off of the class, based off of the assignment, based off of other things like that. Okay, it's much easier to do this, make these informed assumptions with a target audience than it is with a general public. And in fact, this informed assumption helps you build that target audience, unless it's a specific thing you have in mind. But if you have this vague target audience, one way to build that is to make these informed assumptions. And the best way to do that, the best way to start with that, is to think about assumed commonality. Right? What does your audience have in common as a whole, like all together? What do they have in common? And then build off of that. What if they have this in common? What could interest them? Or if they have this in common, why are they doing this? Okay. You could also think about this in terms of what's in common between you and the rhetor, or I'm sorry, you and the audience, the rhetor and the audience, and that's a way to build interest. Okay. This idea of stickiness. This is one of the more confusing sections in your book, and I apologize for that. Stickiness is a way to refer to the ability for a message to stay with the audience. And why would you want that? Well, you want that because it's a way to engage or move the audience, which is the point of a rhetorical situation, is it needs to reach them. And if you don't reach them on the first attempt, especially like with a commercial, then you want to be able for them to think about it again. Okay. So stickiness is a way to talk about this idea of reaching your audience, not just finding their interest, but actually pulling their attention to you. Okay. And another way to think about this is that a lot of times a rhetorical argument is trying to change a habit or change a long-standing problem. Okay. So, for instance, if we're going to talk about global warming, one of the big problems with the global warming debate from the science point of view is that they do not care about stickiness. It's a very complex problem, and they want to talk about the complexity. The other side of the argument is talking about, well, it doesn't exist because very simple reasons. Okay, so there's this complexity versus simplicity, and it's hard to reach the people that don't believe in climate change because you're taking away this simple explanation and this thing that sticks with them and trying to replace it with a very complex idea. And it doesn't work. Okay. And so what you want to do is, if you're trying to craft a rhetorical appeal, you want to think about it in terms of stickiness as one way to move past this long-standing issue. And one thing that I constantly think about when I think about stickiness is there's a series of PSA commercials right now for smoking, and especially with teen smoking. And while there's a little bit, it's kind of a gross campaign, but it just involves one involves a woman in this one going up to buy cigarettes, and another involves a man, an African American man going up to buy cigarettes, and they each have to do some body modification. She pulls skin off of her face, he pulls out her tooth. It's very disgusting, but it's a simple idea that they're trying to get across. Okay, it's simple because it's, you smoke and there are more ramifications than just lung cancer, because everybody knows about the lung cancer. All right, everybody knows that's you're not trying to move anybody's opinion based off of that. So it's simple because it's about the bodily harm, the external harm, not just inside your body, but externally, that smoking does. It's unexpected because it just looks like they're going to buy cigarettes, and you expect them to talk about lung cancer, but they don't. They talk about the way it damages your skin or the way it causes gum disease, so you lose your teeth. Okay? It's concrete. Why? It's very specific. It's very detailed. This is what will happen. Now, whether or not that's true, I guess we could get into scientific debates, but this is the argument they're making. It's credible. Why? Because the person's credible. It's from an anti-smoking group. Okay, it's not making wild claims. It's got a little bit more credibility, and it fits the genre, which is part of credibility, of a PSA, of a public service announcement. It's emotional because you can see here the image on this woman's face. She, it touches you. It reaches out. There's a feeling to this, and it tells a quick story. Okay, so this sort of thing can help you. Now, you don't necessarily have to do it with your pitch, but it could help, and you might want to think about how to simplify your presentation or how to bring in concrete details, how to mess with your how to both appeal to the expectations and genre expectations, but also mess with the expectations of your audience so that it sticks with them a little bit longer. Okay. Another non-PSA version of this is the Google photo commercial that aired a lot during the Olympics. It was a simple idea. It was about you running out of space on your phone to save pictures. It was unexpected because it's this scene of people enjoying life and taking a picture, and then boom, no more memory. It kind of catches you off guard. It's concrete because this is something that people are aware of if it's never happened to them. Okay, so it meets a lot of these ideas. So these are the ways that we kind of talk to the way that, I'm sorry, this is, I went all the way back to the beginning, I apologize. So the audience approach, this is the way we talk about the way the audience interacts with the subject, okay? And the same with this idea of stickiness. How does the audience interact with the subject through the rhetor, okay? Because you are deciding on this. But the way you present the subject is going to help them figure this out. We also want to talk about, the context. Where is this rhetorical argument appearing? And it's appearing within this context of shared knowledge, or what you and your audience both know and you can draw on. And so when we talk about an appeal to shared knowledge, this is something that you kind of do without even thinking. All right. So, for instance, if I'm talking to my friend about, what my plans are for a vacation, then I might reference a vacation I took in the past. And I know he knows about it because I told him about it before, right? So I'll be like, oh, I'm not going to Hilton Head because that was lame, so I'm going to this. And, that's something I won't even think about. I'm going to make an appeal to shared knowledge. I'm just doing this as a way to give him a point of reference about what I'm going to do next, okay? And these appeals to shared knowledge can help you as the rhetor keep the audience's attention, but also kind of draw on a larger amount of information than you really want to dive deep into. Okay, a lot of times when we make comparisons or when we make allusions, we're trying to bring in this outside knowledge so we don't have to talk a ton about it. All right, so you want to enhance your rhetorical argument by drawing on the audience's knowledge. Why does it work? It coerces the audience into getting involved in the argument. And when I say coerce, I don't mean in a shady way. I just mean it brings them along. So instead of being passive, it makes you actively engaged. So for instance, if I'm watching a children's movie is very passive. I'm sitting back and letting them tell me the story. Why? Because they give you a lot of the background. All right. If I'm watching a thriller, then I'm much more engaged, or a mystery. There aren't really mysteries anymore. A thriller or a horror movie, I guess. I'm much more engaged in the movie experience as an active audience member because I'm trying to figure out what's going on. All right. So I have shared knowledge because they've told me stuff, but I also have shared knowledge because of past whatever. So that's something to consider. As a way to bring the audience and get them involved. Why is that important? Because if they're involved, they're more likely to change in terms of rhetoric, but they're also more likely to pay attention, which is what you want if you're giving a speech. All right. Also, you want to appeal to shared knowledge because it allows the rhetoric, and I already talked about, to bring in specifics without going too much into detail. It anchors, as your text says, anchors the text or anchors the speech or the video or whatever. All right. It also builds a foundation upon which rhetoric can work. All right. So an allusion is just a reference. It's not a full explanation. So it's different from an example that you might use as evidence in your speech. An allusion is just something you reference for a bit as a way to bring in that knowledge base without actually delving too much into it. So there are a couple different types of allusions. First, we'll talk about political allusions. So a political allusion is useful in your text as a way to make a statement that recruits the audience into a larger political statement. And when I say political, I don't mean Republican versus Democrat. I mean in terms of big cultural issues that you want to see change. Okay, so these public debates that you're talking about, it might not break down as right versus left, but there's still a politics involved. Okay, so a way to get a society to change. Right? It draws on knowledge of news events, political ideologies, etc., to either recruit or provoke the audience. And political illusions can provoke the audience. Okay, so you may be recruiting your intended audience and provoking other audiences, and you see this all the time in campaign speeches. So, for instance, the way Trump uses crooked Hillary, or the way Hillary is constantly asking for Trump's taxes. That's an allusion to something that he hasn't done. It's an allusion to something he hasn't revealed his taxes. It's allusion to his shady business practices that she is bringing up so that her target audience is agreeing with her, but it's also kind of sticking it to the other side of the debate, or the Trump supporters. Okay, these political illusions often make use of enthymemes. Okay, in a concise appeal. So your book talks about "I am a man" from the civil rights movement. You can also think about "hands up, don't shoot." This is the phrase, if you aren't aware, from Black Lives Matter that arose in the early days of this movement, because it's a protest against cops shooting black people. So this is an enthymeme because it's "hands up, don't shoot." The minor premise is that if I don't put my hands up, you will shoot me. But if I say that, you will shoot me because I'm black. If I say that, if I say the whole thing, then it loses its appeal, it loses its ability to move the audience, because I'm being way too forward. By making this illusion, I bring up all the stuff that happens behind the action of raising your hands up because a gun's being pointed at you. All the cultural illusions, but all the political stuff that comes along with that too. So it's a useful way to bring in a whole host of information without delving deeply into it. Okay. You can also think about cultural illusions, and these are different than what your book calls a allusion to popular culture. The cultural illusion is a way to build solidarity within a community, within a culture. Okay, so and I say here, used to enlist the audience into a community of common concern. So one way to think about this is that the mural in Memorial Hall, if you're not aware, it has a lot of racist imagery on it. It has slaves building a railroad. It has a very evil-looking Indian, or I'm sorry, Native American. There I am making a mistake. Native American stalking in the bushes. It's a problematic mural. But just recently, Dr. Capilouto, the president, decided to take down the thing that was covering the mural so that people could pay attention to it. Well, you can refer to that mural as a way to bring up a cultural illusion. Okay, so I could in my speech, talk about all these divisive things that are going on in this controversy, and then say, just like the mural in Memorial Hall, this is doing blah, 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 blah. Okay, and that's an allusion to something that is common within that smaller community. And this is useful, especially when you're talking about stuff that's not very political, okay, especially not on a national level. So for instance, school reform is usually more of a community-based thing. So if you want to talk about that, then you want to bring up cultural illusions, things that are common to that school or to that school district. Okay. So just something to keep in mind. And then the last one is allusions to popular culture. And your book talks about Quentin Tarantino. Okay, these are appeals that draw on a broader understanding of popular culture to enlist the audience's attention or sympathy. This is an interesting allusion, or it's interesting the way that Tarantino alludes to things, because it's very dated at this point. Tarantino is in his 50s, I think. Either way, a lot of the allusions in Pulp Fiction and in Kill Bill are from the 70s. And so they seem a little dated now. They're still useful for us, but you might think of Family Guy as another way, and that might be dated too, another way to think about the way that popular culture and those type of illusions can bring in an audience and bring in attention. So anyways, the last thing I want to talk about is this idea of the appeal to provocation. It's a weird way to put it, but when we talk about appeals, we're not talking about necessarily things that are good. We're talking about things that get attention. Okay, so something is appealing, it can be either good or bad. So yeah. I just think about the women that write serial killers letters, love letters. It's kind of off-putting for me, but they find it appealing because it's dangerous. Okay, so anyways, provocation, to turn away from that weird thing I just went on rant, but a provocation is often useful as a way to really quickly grab your reader's attention, and that's why a lot of teachers will tell you to get a hook. A hook is a provocation. It usually provokes thought, not necessarily provokes emotions, but it provokes the audience to get involved. And this is something that you can do and should do in your speech. So why would you do it? You get a point across quickly, okay? You can go back to that point, but it's a way to get a point across. It can start a debate about an important topic. So that debate might be the importance of this controversy, okay, that you're looking at. It can push readers' buttons or your audience's buttons if it's a viewer. All right. So if you want to do this, you're more than welcome to. The provoking your audience is basically taking what you know about them and breaking those conventions, or if we're talking about interests, working counter to their interests. Okay, not to turn them off to it, but to kind of like say their interests are stupid. That's a provocation. To allude to things that they might find distasteful. Okay, these are all different types of allusions. One thing that, or provocations rather, one thing that you can see a provocation that's not a negative provocation, because it's not like attacking the audience, but it provokes a response. And it's been around for a while, but it might be off the air now. If you've seen the Sarah McLachlan ad for animal shelters, it is super provocative because the way the combination of the video of animals that are suffering in the shelters or in poor living situations, and Sarah McLachlan's song combined to really push you to kind of want to do something. In fact, the first time my wife saw it, she wanted to go out and get a cat. It just so happens I'm deathly allergic to cats, so it doesn't really work. But it's that kind of immediate action. Another way that provocation worked, but in a negative way, was with the movie The Interview. And if you haven't seen it, that's fine. It's got horrible reviews. It's evidently a horrible movie. But the premise is very, very provocative and actually ended up causing major international concerns for the writer and director of the movie. It's a movie about these two guys that go to North Korea to interview Kim Jong-un and murder and assassinate him. It's a comedy, so it's kind of like, ha ha ha, this is stupid antics. But the idea of assassinating Kim Jong-un was taken so seriously by the North Koreans that it led to some major issues. So, in fact, there were threats of bombings of theaters, and it was pulled from theaters real quick. It may have only been in for a couple of days before they pulled it, and it appeared on Netflix later on. So you want to be careful when you provoke, because you don't want to alienate your audience. I'm not saying that you're going to cause an international incident, but you don't want to alienate your audience. You don't want to force them to turn away from your appeal. Or from your speech. You want to just provoke them to act or provoke them to pay more attention. Okay. Last thing, just to put this all in context, these rhetorical appeals, right, are a way to look at your argument as a whole. And the way to look at where these smaller appeals fit in is here. So when we talk about appeals to expectations or appeals to interests, that's about the content and about how you organize things and in your speech so that you are bringing the reader along and having them pay attention to what you want them to pay attention to. That's logos. Okay? Appeals to shared knowledge and appeals to clarity, which I didn't go into. Those are simply ways to build credibility. If you are clear about your subject or clear about what you're saying, then the assumption is you know what you're talking about. And then there's appeals to provocation and appeals to stickiness. These are ways to bring up pathos or bring up feeling into a rhetorical argument. Now, I'm sorry, my lectures tend to go on for forever, so I thank you for paying attention for so long. I hope this helps. If not, please email me, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. In the next couple of days, you should have an outline due. This outline does not need to be anything major. I just want to see what you're thinking. All right, so it doesn't have to even be completely done. But your speech is coming up. So if you have any questions about Novio, Zentation, or PresentationTube, please let me know. If you have any questions about the pitch itself, please let me know. After the pitch is done, I will have you guys look at the videos, and then we will do a survey in which I'll ask you to rank your top 3 pitches. Which 3 were you the most interested in? And I will use that to build the groups, the teams that you will work with for the rest of the semester. All right? Again, please email me if you have any questions, and have a good day or weekend.